You might know him as one of the most recognized voices in modern evangelical Christianity. A man who has comforted millions, rallied communities in crisis, and stood as a guiding light for those clinging to hope in the darkest of times. But today, the story we're about to tell is not about his message to the world. It's about something much more personal, much closer to home, something that brought millions of people to tears when his own family shared heartbreaking news that touched hearts around the globe. This is the story of Pastor Franklin Graham, and the moment his family's strength became a sobering mirror for all of ours. Franklin Graham needs little introduction. The son of the legendary Billy Graham, he inherited more than a legacy. He inherited a calling. From leading international humanitarian efforts through Samaritan's Purse to speaking at packed arenas and quiet hospital rooms alike, Franklin has walked a path of service that few could ever imagine. He has been there in the rubble of earthquakes, in the aftermath of hurricanes, in the midst of wars and famines, always offering water, blankets, prayer, and the one thing people grasp for when the world falls apart, hope. He's preached messages of faith in cities and towns, ministered to leaders in powerful capitals, and stood shoulder to shoulder with grieving families when disaster struck. But all those moments, as impactful as they were, pale in comparison to the news his family shared that would stop hearts globally. It began innocently enough. Social media posts from his wife. A message that at first seemed like so many others. But then the tone changed. The warmth and gratitude gave way to vulnerability. And then to a truth that would leave millions in tears. The announcement spoke not about politics, not about another mission trip, not about yet another disaster, relief operation, but about their family's own struggle. Millions who had followed this renowned pastor's work were suddenly confronted with a simple, human reality. Even those we see as strong can be deeply hurting, because sometimes faith isn't only tested in the rubble of distant cities. Sometimes it's tested in the quiet of your own home. The message he shared revealed a season of hardship, a battle that his family had been walking through in private. Until that moment, it's the kind of news that makes you pause your day, take a breath, and dare to imagine what it would be like if it were your own family. As people around the world read those words, something remarkable happened. Strangers began praying together. Messages of love and support poured in from every corner of the globe. Churches paused their services to pray. Online communities lit up with prayers, tears, and shared stories of hope and heartbreak. And why did it resonate so deeply? Because Franklin Graham's life, filled with acts of compassion and faith, had somehow become our story to think about that for a moment. A man who's spent decades offering strength to others now needed strength offered to him. A pastor known for lifting up others found himself being lifted up by people who knew him through television broadcasts, through humble humanitarian work, or simply through heartfelt devotion to faith. In the weeks that followed, people began sharing their own stories, stories of loss, of pain, of trials they thought they would never survive. And in that wave of shared humanity, something powerful was revealed. Even those who stand tall in public life can experience the same deep sorrows we all do. Perhaps that's why the announcement spread so quickly. Not because it was shocking, but because it was real. It reminded us that behind every public figure, whether a pastor, a humanitarian, a celebrity, or an influencer, there is a family with quiet struggles, late nights, whispered prayers, and unspoken fears. It reminded us that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to face it. And it reminded millions of people that we are never alone in our pain. In the days after the news broke, Franklin's voice returned to the public eye. Not with speeches about rallies or sermons about doctrine, but with something deeper. He spoke about love, about resilience, about how even in sorrow you can find a deeper connection to grace. And what he said next moved even more hearts. He thanked people for their prayers, their support, and their shared tears, not as a leader above others, but as a fellow traveler on the often difficult road of life. Because at the end of the day, what binds us together is not our titles, not our achievements, not even our faith, but our shared humanity. People all around the world lit candles in their windows. Churches organized prayer vigils. Social media was flooded with messages like, "We stand with you, and we are praying for your family." And in a world that sometimes feels divided, that outpouring of collective compassion was a reminder that we are more united by empathy than we often realize. And as his family continues to walk through this season, millions continue to hold them in their thoughts and prayers, not because they are celebrities, not because they wield influence, but because they, like all of us, are human beings with hearts that feel deeply, love intensely, and grieve genuinely. When we watch the news, scroll through our feeds, or hear about someone else's pain, it's easy to think that could never happen to me. But when the stories hit close to home, when they involve people we recognize, whose voices we've followed, the impact is different. It shakes us, it opens our eyes, softens our hearts. So today, as you listen to this story, remember, the strength we admire in others doesn't make them immune to life's hardships. Simply shows us that even in the midst of tears, we can stand tall. We can choose love. We can choose hope. We can choose to be there for one another, and that, perhaps more than anything, is the most powerful legacy any of us could ever leave behind. So take a moment right now to hold those you love a little closer. Say "I love you" a little louder. And remember, even when the world feels heavy, you are not alone. And as the days passed after the heartbreaking news was shared, something else quietly unfolded. Something that didn't make loud headlines, but spoke volumes to those who were paying attention. Franklin Graham didn't retreat from the world. He didn't disappear behind closed doors. Instead, he chose to show up not as a man with all the answers, but as someone walking through pain one step at a time. For many people watching from afar, that choice mattered more than any sermon ever could. Because when someone who has spent a lifetime talking about faith suddenly has to live it out in the most personal way possible, the message hits differently. His words carried more weight. His silence at times said even more. People noticed the pauses in his voice, the heaviness behind his eyes, the moments where strength and vulnerability existed side by side. And that's when it truly sank in for millions of viewers around the world. This wasn't just news. This was real life unfolding in front of them. For decades, Franklin Graham had been associated with hope in moments of global crisis. When tragedy struck somewhere in the world, his name often followed, tied to relief efforts, prayer services, and rebuilding communities from the ground up. But this time, there was no disaster zone to fly into, no microphones to stand behind with prepared words. This time, the crisis was deeply personal, fact, and there was no escaping it. That reality struck a nerve with so many people because it reflected their own lives. Parents who had faced devastating diagnoses, families who had sat in hospital waiting rooms praying for miracles, people who knew what it felt like to wake up every day carrying a weight that no one else could see. Suddenly, Franklin Graham wasn't just a public figure anymore. He became a reflection of shared pain and shared faith. People began revisiting old interviews, past sermons, moments where he had spoken about trusting God in uncertainty. And now, those words felt different. They weren't theoretical. They weren't distant. They were being tested in real time, under the most emotional circumstances imaginable. And through it all, what stood out most was the family's decision to be honest. They didn't pretend everything was fine. They didn't hide behind carefully polished statements. Instead, they allowed the world to see that faith doesn't erase heartbreak, it walks through it. Okay. That belief doesn't make grief disappear. It gives you something to hold on to when everything else feels unstable. That honesty is what brought millions to tears. Because in a culture where public figures are often expected to be unbreakable, this moment reminded everyone that being strong doesn't mean being untouched by pain. Sometimes strength looks like admitting you're hurting. Sometimes it looks like asking others to pray when you don't have the words anymore. As messages continued pouring in, stories followed countless personal testimonies from people who said this moment changed how they viewed their own struggles. Some wrote about reconnecting with family members they had drifted away from. Others shared that they returned to prayer after years of silence. And some simply said, if they can endure this with faith, maybe I can face tomorrow too. Ripple effect, quiet, emotional. Deeply human is something no spotlight could ever manufacture. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of this story. Not the fame, not the recognition, not even the legacy attached to the Grom name, but the reminder that behind every well-known face is a family that loves deeply, fears deeply, and hurts deeply just like everyone else. In moments like these, the lines between leader and follower blur. What remains is something far more important. Compassion. And as time continues to move forward, as healing and grief take their unpredictable turns, one thing is certain: this moment left a mark. Not just on Franklin Graham and his family, but on millions of people who were reminded to slow down, to care more deeply, and to never take a single day for granted, because life can change in an instant. One message, one phone call, one quiet moment that alters everything. And yet, even in those moments, there is still room for love, for faith, and for the kind of unity that brings strangers together in shared hope. So as this story continues, not just for this family, but for everyone listening, remember this: pain does not have the final word. And sometimes the most powerful sermons are not preached from a stage, but lived through in silence, courage, and grace. Disclaimer: the content in this video is based on publicly available information, media sources, and opinions. It is created for entertainment and educational purposes only. We do not claim or guarantee that every detail is 100% accurate.